series. Our speaker today is Joshua Schank. He is the Chief Innovation Officer with Los Angeles County Metro and is a nationally known expert on transportation policy. At Metro, Joshua heads the Office of Extraordinary Innovation, which seeks to do precisely what its title implies and about which we're going to learn more today. Before moving to Los Angeles in 2015, Joshua is president and CEO of the Eno Center for Transportation, which is a nonprofit foundation in Washington, D.C. that advances transportation policy and leadership. Before Eno, Joshua was a senior staff member with the Bipartisan Policy Center, a sadly quixotic enterprise. And before that, he was transportation policy advisor with Senator Hillary Clinton. What happened to her? I didn't hear anything after that. During the development of the federal Safety Lou Surface Transportation Bill. He's also worked with PB Consult, ICF International, the U.S. DOT Inspector General, and the Permanent Citizens Advisor Committee of the New York MTA. He's a planner by training, which means he's welcome here. He holds a BA in Urban Studies from Columbia, a Master of City Planning from MIT, and a PhD in Urban Planning from Columbia. Finally, I'd note he's a reflective, even scholarly practitioner. Reflecting on his time on Capitol Hill, he's co-author of the book All Roads Lead to Congress, the $300 billion Fight Over Highway Funding, published in 2007. Please join me in welcoming to UCLA, Joshua Schank.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone. I love being here. I miss planning school a lot. It was really so much fun, so enjoy it while you can. And this has really become, in my opinion, the best planning school in the country, so you're very fortunate to be here. I said that before I moved to Los Angeles, just to be clear, but it's even better having you guys here because Brian and the rest of the team offer a lot of assistance to the things that we're trying to do. And in a lot of ways, what we're trying to do is bring the academic community and the findings of the academic community to bear in a challenging public sector environment. That's kind of why you need an Office of Extraordinary Innovation, because a lot of people think that what we're doing is that, we're a bunch of tech nerds who are sitting around trying to hack things and figure out tech solutions to stuff, and that's really not at all what we're doing. What we're doing is trying to solve challenging public policy questions. And those really are extraordinarily difficult to overcome. And that's why we have planners in charge of it, because you have what planning really is I'm sure you've learned in your time here, is it's about public policy. It's about trying to figure a way to get to that optimal outcome despite all the public policy challenges that may lie in your way. Now, I've organized this talk because I'm at an academic institution in the form of a pop quiz. I understand that people don't typically give pop quizzes in graduate school, but I figure why not? This quiz is really going to be for you to try to figure out who said different things. What I'm going to talk about, we do a lot of stuff in the Office of Extraordinary Innovation. I'm not going to talk about all of it. Brian's asked me to focus on the new mobility initiatives that we have, so I'm going to discuss those. And the new mobility initiatives that we have face challenges internally and externally. I think when I took this job, I thought that my biggest challenges to accomplishing new things in transportation would be external forces, political forces, people from outside saying, no, we don't want that, no, we don't want this. The actual reality of it is that the internal challenges have been way bigger. Now, it's partly because we haven't gotten to some of the external stuff yet, and I'm sure that will be more challenging the more we get to it. But I'm going to talk about both and about how we've tried to overcome them the best we can and sometimes failed. So here's the first way I'm going to start this pop quiz is I'm going to talk first about, just give you a general sense of how we're welcomed at Metro and what the reaction has been to the Office of Extraordinary Innovation throughout Metro. So I want you to choose which of these quotes is a real Metro quote. This is a really innovative idea, but we can't do it. It's never been done before. It's a classic innovation quote. Why are you even here? What value do you bring to Metro? And finally, this is the greatest idea in the history of ideas. So who want to take a stab? Which one's the real quote? Anyone? What do you think? B, yes. B is the real quote. In fact, I was told this by a very high-level official at Metro who this is long after I've been there for more than a year, said, why are you here? What value do you bring? Because the value we were trying to bring was to come to her department and say, you're doing it all wrong. And people don't like that when you do it. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't need to be done. Marla, who's in the back, who runs one of our new mobility projects, she and I were talking on the way over here about the challenge of trying to be friendly and get things done at the same time, which is often very difficult in an environment like Metro, because people are entrenched in their jobs and they are trying to protect their area, and they don't want some, academic-based researcher coming in and telling them that the data actually shows they're not doing it right. So that's a huge challenge that we face. This slide doesn't come up exactly right, but you got it. So one of the ways that we've tried to establish a method by which we can make change is through our unsolicited proposal policy, right? This was an idea of our CEO, Phil Washington, who used this successfully in Denver before he came to LA. And he used it primarily to drive private financing for public sector projects, so public-private partnerships. But we have been using it as a tool to solicit ideas from the private sector. And the idea is that anyone can submit an idea, it gets fair consideration, we give a turnaround, we give a response. So far we've received 109 proposals since February 2016, so that's a lot. Once the proposal comes in, there's a phase 1 analysis of the concept. And if we like it, then we ask for more information, which is a phase 2. And then if we like that, we go to a competitive procurement process. That's how the public sector works. Not as easy as just, that's a good idea, let's do it. But it is a faster process than the typical Metro process, which was not as easy as this. Like private sector people would struggle to get a meeting, they would struggle to get their ideas heard. Now they can get them. And when we review these proposals, it's not as simple as they come into the Office of Extraordinary Innovation and we say, that's a great idea, let's do a RFP. Because anything we want to do requires coordination with another department. We're only 12 people, and anything that we're doing means that we're working with someone else, with very few exceptions. And I'll talk about one of those exceptions later. But in general, we have to get another department that's gung-ho about the idea, which means trying to be friendly to people who you're coming in and telling that they're doing their job incorrectly. Just to give you a sense of where all these are, most of the proposals that come in are not going anywhere. And you would expect that, right? But a large number are. And in fact, we've advanced towards implementation with about a dozen projects at this point. So those are new things that Metro wouldn't have been doing if not for the idea of unsolicited proposals. Just to give you a sense of what categories they fall into, we have gotten a lot on the major capital side, so the P3s that I was talking about earlier that our CEO, I think, initially envisioned, but most of them are not in that category. Most of them for totally different ideas of things that we should be doing. And just to give you a sense of where the challenges are, these different categories provide very different paths to success. For example, if you want to do something with branding, marketing, advertising, art, signage, that's going to go through communications. Communications is a very clear idea of what they want to do. So coming in with the new idea about that is going to be very challenging. Well, fair payment, same thing. We've got long-term contracts locked up for fair payment. If you've got to try to go in and change that course of that, it's going to be a challenge. But there are other areas, particularly integrated tech-enabled mobility services, where there's not really anyone in charge. And so having people come in with ideas there is going to be more doable. Data analytics and software, there's no department in charge of that, which is part of the problem. And so having people come in with ideas there is really helpful. So now I'll give you another choice of which of these is something that was actually said by Metro. Why would we help a competitor? Something that someone asked me. You are ruining everything. Or we cannot legally do this. This was in response to an unsolicited proposal we received. Anyone want to take a stab at this one? So, what I heard C? No, it was actually all three of them. So, the reason that people said that is that we had a proposal from Uber to do something that was really never been done before. Now, this leads to lesson number 1, and you'll see there are 5 lessons that I'm going to draw out of it. One was establish a credibility through early wins. When we first got there, first of all, people were like, what is this, name, Office of Extraordinary Innovation, who do you think you are? Which, of course, we didn't name the office, by the way, but we were in it, and we chose to take the job, so it's our fault. But establishing credibility was critical because people were immediately saying, what value do you bring here? But also they were saying, well, maybe these guys will just go away if we ignore them long enough, right? I mean, that's a consistent problem in the public sector anyway. At any level of public sector, you're going to find that when you come in and you're responsive to an elected or someone who is reporting to an elected, as my boss does, he reports to a board of directors composed almost entirely of elected officials, that the people who are career people at the agency might try to wait you out. And they do that because they've seen a lot of people come and go. They know people get fired, and they're still there. So you have to establish credibility through early wins and get something on the table that shows that you could actually accomplish something, or else you're going to be out of there fast. And that's something that we did with Uber when they proposed an unsolicited proposal right off the bat to say, look, you're opening the Expo line. Some of you may remember when we opened the Expo line to Santa Monica. That's not too far away from here. And they said, you're opening the Expo line. Why don't we do a partnership? We will bring people to and from the Expo line through Uber Pool. We'll do it at a discount, and it's a great deal. So it seems like, from our perspective, it seems like a no-brainer. Now, why did people say we cannot legally do this? Well, they said that because, as you may know, if you want to put up advertisements in the city of Santa Monica, you can't. So you have to do that on our property, not on Santa Monica property, and that was a challenge. We also told you're ruining everything because this was the opening of probably the biggest line that LA has ever opened, getting to the sea finally after all these years. And we were coming in there the last minute saying, let's do this partnership with Uber. And they were saying, we got everything all set up for months. You want to mess this up? You're ruining everything. And then they said, why would you help a competitor? Which is the most clear, obvious thing that they would say, right? Why are you helping Uber? They're going to just get more business out of this. Well, but that goes back to an issue which I'll return to later of, well, what are we trying to accomplish? From a planner's perspective, I think, and from a typical researcher's perspective, the job of Metro is to improve mobility. But people at Metro don't necessarily see their job as improving mobility. And in fact, they might see their job as things like getting more people to ride Metro, which might improve mobility but might not, but is certainly something they're going to be focused on. Or even worse than that, they might see their job as making Metro look good, even if it isn't doing good things, and which was exactly where they were focused when it came to the Expo line opening, right? So when we're trying to throw this partnership at them, you can understand that there would be this kind of negative reaction. So we have another choice for you. Promise of car ownership of the past, freedom of open roads, reality has become more of a burden. It's a matter of courtesy and fairness. If someone can't afford a car, they should go first. And I think you're going to see incredible diversity and mobility. Even with all the change we're seeing today, we're only at the tip of the iceberg of what's going to come. So which of these were said by someone at Metro? These wise quotes about mobility. Yeah, correct. None of them were said by someone at Metro. And in fact, they were said by people that you probably know very well. Number one was by John Zimmer, who runs Lyft. Number two is Elon Musk, who runs now the Boring Company. And number three was Jay Walder, who is one of my favorite transportation people, who runs another private sector company called Motivate that operates bike share. The point here is that you have to learn to distinguish between PR and reality when it comes to new mobility partnerships. Because the private sector has a lot of motivations that are not necessarily aligned with what you're trying to achieve. And this gets to what external partnerships are all about. They are trying to raise money and make money. That's their primary goal, right? Now, they might also accomplish other public policy objectives along the way, and that's wonderful. But they're never going to put those first. And you wouldn't expect them to put those first. But when they talk about it, they might put those first. And so understanding the difference between what they're going to say and what they're going to do is critical to success. And Marla learned this directly up front as she was working on a Mobility on Demand project. So Mobility on Demand, if you're not familiar with it, is a grant from FTA. They're giving it to agencies all over the country, Federal Transit Administration, giving to agencies all over the country to try out experimental partnerships like this with new mobility providers. And our grant, which UCLA is a part of, is intended to say what happens when Metro partners with a transportation network company and provides first last mile services to 3 of our stations, and what can come of that. And FTA is relaxing some of their rules in order to make these things happen. It is by far the most ambitious of the Mobility on Demand projects, if we do say so ourselves. But when we started doing this, our original partner on this project, and notice I said original partner, was Lyft. And Lyft, if you heard them talk publicly about this, it's not just John Zimmer, they will say things like, our goal is to improve mobility. We want to have shared mobility. We want to accomplish a lot of the public policy goals that you care about. But when it gets down to actually figuring out what that means, things become a little bit more challenging. Because the critical goal of this mod project is to accomplish the public policy benefits using a private sector provider. And when that comes down to actually things like sharing data and paying for those public policy benefits, it becomes a challenge. Let me just give you an example. We had certainly talked before the partnership was, before the grant was awarded, when we applied for this grant with Lyft, about who would pay for various aspects of this. You would imagine that there are a lot of public policy aspects that have to be dealt with. You have to provide access for people who are disabled, which Lyft does not currently do. You have to provide access for people who don't have smartphones, which Lyft does not currently do. You have to provide access for people who don't have bank accounts, which Lyft does not do very well. And you also want to make sure that you're targeting this towards low-income people, because the whole point of this is to open up the transportation network companies to those who can't currently use them. Right now, you could take a TNC to get to any of our stations if you can afford it, and if you can walk, and if you have a bank account, and if you have a smartphone. But since the average household income on our system is $19,000 a year, a lot of those people don't have smartphones, or if they do have smartphones, don't have data plans. And we are trying to make sure that we cater to absolutely everybody as a public policy goal. That's a little bit misaligned from what Lyft's bottom line is. And what it came down to was, well, who's working harder to fight their own attorneys? Because Lyft's people might say, yeah, we want to do this. And in fact, I think they meant that they wanted to do it. But when their lawyers took a look at it, they would say, well, why would we enter into this agreement? Why would we share this data that, if we share it, puts us at risk? Why would we get into the business of transporting people in wheelchairs? That seems like a dangerous thing to do. And why would we want to pay for that? So there's a big difference between what they say and what they actually do. And fighting attorneys is actually one of the biggest parts of the job of being in the innovation office. So we're used to it, because every time, this is really a true story. Every time the attorneys tell us you can't do something, our first reaction is to say, put it in writing, we will give it to our boss, and he will decide whether he agrees with you or not. Because otherwise, we'll be spending all day with them trying to figure out whether we can do it. And the attorneys are there to provide counsel to us. They're not there to make strategic business decisions. They're not there to make public policy decisions. And it's only because our CEO has made that very clear that we're able to do anything. Marla and I were just talking on the way over about this issue that we have on this project, where our attorneys were trying to tell us that we couldn't partner with our new transportation network company, which is VIA. We couldn't partner with them because of a new court case that ruled that all their employees can't be are actually employees now, that they can't have contract services. And they said, well, you can't do it, it's too risky. And it took a lot of back and forth to say, okay, tell us what the risk is, quantify it, make sure we understand what it is, and we'll show it to Phil, and he can decide whether to take that risk, before eventually they said, that's all right, go ahead. And so that happens all the time. We dumped Lyft and we said, it's not you, it's me, and we have to get out of this, largely in part because of our advisory board, actually, which Brian is part of. One of the unique things we did with our structure is we set up a direct line to the academic and nonprofit and other public sector community through our advisory board. They meet quarterly. We initially thought we were going to meet twice every year. But they were so excited that they wanted to be quarterly, which we were really very thankful for. And then we created a subcommittee focused on new mobility because they were so excited about that. And we talked to the subcommittee and said, what do we do about this Lyft thing? They're being really difficult. We don't know what to do. And they're like, you've got to break up with them. This is not working out. So it was a really helpful interaction. All right, next set of quotations. Let's see. See some flaws in the data that lead me to question your conclusions. You are a creative genius. We are blessed to have you, and we'll build statues in your honor. This is a waste of time and money. That's what Bob told me. I think you all know where this is going. Yes, this is the one that I heard. Unfortunately, that is often how decisions get made. In this particular case, this was not referring to no mobility. It was referring to a drone project. So we had an unsolicited proposal to use drones to inspect our facility, inspect our tracks. And we went to operations and said, oh, we got this great idea and use drones to inspect our tracks. And why don't we test it out? They'll test it for free. And they said, this is a waste of time and money. That's what Bob told me. And I said, could you show me some data to indicate why you believe that it is a waste of time and money? And they said, go away. So what we did is we went to a different department and said, hey, what about drones here in facilities? And they said, yeah, that's really cool. So we tested the drone there, and we're actually moving forward with the drone program, which is a great example of how you have to be a little bit nimble when it comes to trying to implement some of these new ideas and find the people within the organization who are actually open to them, because there are people like that. They just may not be running the most important stuff all the time. So that leads to lesson 3. See if you can agree on the goals first. Notice I didn't say agree on the goals first, but see if you can agree on the goals first, because it's kind of hard to agree on the goals. And I think this is one of the things I underestimated as well. When I came in, I thought, well, surely people will agree on what the goal is when you put it to them in the right way. Like they'll understand that, yeah, ridership is important, but that's not the goal. The goal is to improve mobility. Well, they might understand that in an intellectual way, but that doesn't necessarily translate into understanding that in terms of their day-to-day actions, because their day-to-day actions are all set up towards the goal that they have in mind. And it's been set up that way for years. And so changing that is actually very difficult. But you do want to try. And and this is what happened, and again, about going back to mobility on demand, talking about an internal struggle. We talked about the external one with Lyft. Now we've got Via. They actually are a great partner and much more nimble and able to adjust to public sector needs. And we've chosen our stations, we've moved forward, but we ran into a little bit of a snag, because when it came to choosing the service area around the stations, there was a disagreement. And I'm just going to briefly explain what that disagreement was. So I'm not going to tell you what the station is, because you're not supposed to know yet, but there's a station on our system that has a major bus line running into it here, and then major bus lines running into it here, and we're going to provide first, last mile services to that station. Service area A is where we thought we would like to serve, because given all these people coming on these major bus lines, we know that there's a lot of traffic there, and perhaps some of those people might be better served by Via's on-demand service. It's an on-demand pooled service that will perhaps improve their lives by getting them to our stations faster. And also, of course, we're bringing it to a population that doesn't currently have it. So that seemed like a great place to do it. Our operations department felt like this was a better place to do it. And they felt like this was a better place to do it because they did not have bus service there. Because they were concerned that if we put it here, we're just going to be taking people off the buses. And rather, instead, we put it here, we'll be providing a service to people who don't currently have a service, and we won't be taking people off of our buses. There are other buses that run here, by the way. They're not metro buses. So then we said, right, but if you live here, why would you go to this station? It's unlikely. You're much more likely to go to this station, which we're not going to offer you. But you can't go to this station if this is not the target area. In fact, this station doesn't meet our demographic needs, because one of the things we're trying to do is serve a demographic that is underserved. And this didn't do it. So we had to stick with this station. In the end, we couldn't agree on the goals, and we went with their plan. So we're going to be doing this area. And the reason we couldn't agree on the goals is that they see their goal as running buses and getting people on those buses. That is a very different goal than trying to say, well, how do we service our customers most effectively? That's how we look at it. Is we look at it as, well, everybody who lives in LA County is a customer. They pay sales taxes. And in fact, people visiting LA County are customers too, because they're here and they expect a good service. And the better we can serve them, the better it serves LA County. 50 million people a year visiting. So we saw it as, this will improve mobility, it'll provide a better service to existing customers, and yeah, we might lose some bus riders, but why wouldn't we then reallocate that service to where it's needed if that's indeed the case? That would seem to be a better win-win. We lost that battle. And I think we lost that battle in large part because we hadn't yet agreed on those goals in a meaningful way. And we're still working on that. The way that we're able to work on that is through our strategic plan. So in his infinite wisdom, our CEO foresaw this, which I really didn't. He understood that the innovation office has to run the strategic plan. When I first took this job, I was talking to my old boss, who's the chair of the board at Eno, about whether I should take the job. She was trying to convince me not to take the job, so she was a little bit biased, but she said, well, you're going to be responsible for innovation and P3s, and that makes sense, you're really good at that, but you're not very good at strategic planning. And are you sure you want to do that part of it? And I was like, yeah, I'm really not very good at strategic planning. And maybe why is strategic planning in this office? Well, now I understand why it's in this office. I also understood that I had to hire someone who did know how to do good strategic planning, which I did. And she is the deputy for the office. The strategic plan, though, is intended to get everyone settled on what the mission is, what the goals are for the organization. We have our draft strategic plan out right now. We just, after 2 years of outreach and 2 years of work, we've got it ready. I encourage you to look at it, see what you think, submit your comments within the next 2 weeks. I think the deadline is coming up. And the plan is intended to get everyone aligned with what we're trying to accomplish and intended to set performance measures that will keep us accountable for that. But it's not in place yet. But strategic planning is critical to innovation because if you don't agree on what you're trying to achieve, you'll never agree on what the project should look like. You'll never agree on what the project should be. And you can't do new innovative things unless you agree on what you're trying to accomplish in the first place. It's just kind of a critical a priori. But this does get to the larger issue of the challenge in terms of addressing customer experience. One of the things in our strategic plan is that we say one of our goals is to focus on the customer experience and that customers need to be a key component of what we're doing. And that's not revolutionary. And I think transit agencies have probably been saying this for 30 years, right? But they don't actually do it. And in fact, the scenario I just described where we weren't thinking about our customers, but we were thinking about our own buses is a great example. We often look at our job as making sure we're moving vehicles and that they're on time and that they're clean and they're safe. And that's all very important, but people are actually our job, right? That's where we're supposed to be helping people, not helping buses. And the misalignment between private and public sector in terms of how you address customers is really critical to the challenge and something that we encounter all the time, right? Because the private sector, you often hear customers always right, and that's great in theory, but on the public sector, it's very difficult because at the end of the day, the electeds are always right. We can challenge them. We can say to them, well, we don't think you should do it this way, but they're going to say that they want it done for that specific way, and they are our directors. They're the board. So it often becomes a conflict between what we might want to do for customers and what the electeds think. More customers, more revenue is a given in the private sector. Well, unless you're Uber or Lyft. But for most companies, more customers, more revenue. But here, every time we have more customers, it costs us money. So unless we're adding customers in the off-peak or at night, we're going to be taking a loss. And so that changes your perspective on should we be adding customers or not? And when should we be adding customers? A great example of that is the project I was just talking about, where we might be getting more people onto our transit system, but when are we going to get those people? Probably during the peak. And it's probably not going to help our cost structure at all. And that's how it's going to be judged. Whereas in the private sector, you get more people and more customers, you're probably doing all right. Private sector, of course, loses customers, and they could eventually go out of business, although it seems like no one goes out of business with losing customers these days, but you could. For us, we lose customers, and probably not going to change our service very much. We typically provide the same service because in order to change our service takes a tremendous amount of effort that we have to go through every time we make a service change, Title VI analysis, all the other analyses that are required. So we might not necessarily change our service when we lose customers. More products, more market share. Of course, more products is more complicated. People often wonder why transit agencies only operate one or two types of buses. And it's because you try to add new types of vehicle sizes, it's more trouble than it's worth. It's more expense than it's worth. I did have someone say to me, and I'm sorry if this quotation is coming up later on, but I did have someone say to me, we don't want to offer our customers more products because that will just confuse them. And that is the perspective of many people at Metro. And of course, the biggest one being more risk is more reward. You're not really rewarded for risk in the public sector, except us. That's why the office was set up, and that's what's a wonderful thing about it. But in the private sector, oftentimes you can see people taking risks and getting a benefit from it. For us, unlikely. Most of the time, if you take any kind of risk, even at the smallest possible risk, you are going to be held accountable and you could lose your job very easily. All right, so now we're going to choose the salesperson quotation, right? Because we get a lot of salespeople coming to us. This new autonomous vehicle technology will improve safety while improving customer experience. Our drones are ready to whisk passengers across Los Angeles tomorrow, just say the word. And it works at low speeds uncleared right away. Yes, this is the one that they actually said because the others aren't true. Now, the others will be purported to be true by the media in many cases, but the reality, and I know this is only said to me because one of my friends happens to work at one of these autonomous bus places, and I was saying to her, like, what really, what can you do? Tell me what you really can do. And so she said, yeah, all right, low speeds, clear right away. But this is a key lesson, which is you have to resist the urge to demonstrate technology. I think that's going on like crazy in our society right now, particularly in the public sector, and you see it all over the place, where an agency will create an innovation office, or they'll have some drive to say, we got to be innovative, and they'll say, what's the latest cutting edge technology, and we'll demonstrate it. Won't that be wonderful? Well, there's a drawback to that, which is you could be spending your time doing something to actually meaningfully help your customers. And instead, if you're just demonstrating technology, you might learn something from that. You might not. I don't really see much value to Metro, personally, in demonstrating a bus that can operate at low speeds on a cleared right-of-way. I think we might learn some things from that, but I don't see what we're going to learn from that that's going to immediately lead me to say, oh, well, we have to do something totally different that's going to be fantastic. Or I don't see what the upside is. This is particularly relevant to our MicroTransit project, which I'm going to talk about next. There is a MicroTransit Graveyard, for those who haven't read the Eno paper that was really written by us, that's about what's happened with microtransit experiences across the country. There are examples of microtransit projects that have failed left and right. And we're about to undertake what is the most ambitious microtransit project in the country. And so we decided that we didn't want to repeat those failures, and we didn't want to just demonstrate the technology. We wanted to actually provide a viable service. And so we spent a considerable amount of time researching what went wrong with those guys. You may be familiar with the line with the experiment in Kansas City, which was with Bridge, which is also out of business. They partnered with Kansas City Transportation Authority, and the mistake they made was they said, let's try to figure. They spent a lot of effort trying to make it work in the first place, getting the unions to agree, getting everything in place. And they said, all right, where should this be? Well, let's put it in a place where we don't have service right now. That will, it's a place where we could really use some service. And that was not an unreasonable idea, but it didn't work. And I think the reason it didn't work is that they didn't really sit there and say, where is the market for microtransit? Where is it that people need this specific kind of service? Not where is that we're missing bus service. Where is it that people want this? And the same thing happened, or similar thing happened with the Flex service at VTA up in Santa Clara Valley, where they were so eager to demonstrate this technology that they went out with something without really trying to educate the public about what it was about, and marketing it and telling people why it was there and why it was going to be beneficial and where it was going to be beneficial. They just went out with it. And both of these failed and did not have sufficient ridership to justify microtransit. And I think in large part, that was because of the eagerness to demonstrate, eagerness to put it out there rather than to get it right. So, here's some more Metro quotations. We need to promote innovation. Sorry, there's an extra word in there. We need to promote innovation, take risks, and break through walls to achieve success. If we stay out of jail, that's a win. Or we have never had delays or gone over budget on a project.
A.
Who said A? No, it's actually C. I was in a meeting early on with a fellow from the procurement office, and I was in a meeting with the private sector. We're talking about P3s, and I was saying, well, this would be a great opportunity for us to transfer some of the risk of this project to the private sector and ensure that we stay within budget and don't have any delay. And he said, Metro has never had a delay or been over budget on a project. This is an actual quotation. So, my point there is that this was when I first got to Metro, and this was someone from procurement who has now since been marginalized, and there's been a new person put in charge of the office, and their perspective is totally different, and that's so critical, because we wouldn't be able to do any of the stuff we're doing without procurement being on top of it. Now, the reason he'd said that is that a procurement office often finds itself in the business of protecting Metro. That's what its job is. How do we make sure that we don't get dinged? How do we make sure that someone doesn't complain? How do we make sure that we don't get sued? All of those are their objectives, which puts them directly at odds with an innovation office, right? Where we are thinking about, well, how do we get stuff done quickly? How do we do cool new stuff that we've never done before? So it was a good thing that we got someone new in charge, because that new person came in hired by our CEO with the direct charge to work with us on these things and make these things happen. And you know, a lot of times, just as an aside, when it comes to projects and going over budget and delays, people in the public sector will think that we stayed on budget and we didn't have delay because they'll say, well, we had a contingency for spending more money and we used that contingency. That's not going over budget. That's just using the extra money that we had there in case we went over budget. But, right. Or that wasn't a delay that was our fault. That was a delay of the kind. Well, still really a delay, isn't it? So they'll find all kinds of tortured excuses for why it's okay. But the critical lesson I'm trying to get to here is about procurement, because when it came to microtransit, we tried to do this in a totally different way. So just to kind of give you the background on the microtransit project, we approached this not as let's demonstrate microtransit. We received an unsolicited proposal from a microtransit provider who said, we want to partner with you to provide microtransit services where you are the vehicle owner and you are providing the operators, and we're providing you with the software. And we're going to help you figure out where this should go and what it should look like. That is very different than us going out and saying, hey, let's do microtransit, in which case we would be approached by a million people who would say, oh, we got microtransit, we'll do it with you. And they'd be competing with them, falling all over themselves to demonstrate the technology. The goal here, which we did achieve agreement on, because this is one of those cases where there's an exception, right? No department wanted this. When this came in, yeah, you could say the operations department could want it, but the operations department is too busy with trying to get buses to run on time and not succeeding. So they had to. No, I'm kidding. The truth is that the bus challenge that we're all facing is in large part because we haven't agreed on what the goals are, and that's where the strategic plan comes in. Is that once we start agreeing on the goals, you'll see things in the strategic plan that actually will improve bus speeds and will get our buses on time, like exclusive bus lanes, congestion pricing, things like that. But my point is that operations didn't want it, so we got it. And we took this project and were able to say that we don't just want to provide first mile, last mile services, which is what people will often think about when they think about microtransit. You know, it's a pooled on-demand service with a vehicle that's going to be bigger than a sedan and smaller than a bus, is the way to think about it. But also to allow people who are existing customers to have a better ride, right? Because right now, a lot of our services, you might take a bus from one place, from one part of the city, and then you have to wait another 10 minutes and transfer to another bus, and another one, maybe another 20 minutes. By the time you're done, it's an hour and a half. This could be a point-to-point service. That would be really helpful. Just any water here? Yes. Awesome. Getting too excited here. So the point was that we weren't just going to make this a first last mile service. It wasn't just going to be an addition to our existing service. It was the whole idea was that this would be a new service that we're providing that will be completely integrated with our transit system and serve people who currently are not served well by our existing transit system. And when you say things like that, you do get the reaction of, well, aren't we going to take riders off of our buses? But because we're doing this project ourselves, we're going to have some flexibility to do that. So what made it innovative in the procurement side? First of all, procurement made it unstoppable. Because a lot of these projects come in and you're starting out with what you're going to do, and the different departments might tell you all the reasons why you can't do it, and procurement is not necessarily motivated to make it happen, and it might linger for a while. But what happened in this case is procurement took over the project. This became a key initiative of the CEO that he kept talking about publicly. He made it such a big initiative that they took it over, set up deadlines, things started to happen really fast that we're going to make sure we got this done on time, and they took responsibility for it. But we also introduced several key innovations. One was that we were able to use subject matter experts. Now you might say, well, that seems like something that would be obvious. Like, wouldn't you always use subject matter experts? But actually, that's not something that we do. In fact, traditionally, procurement is a very guarded activity at a transit agency. So while you might have somebody who is in charge, who's on the review team, you're probably going to be restricted to 3 people who are on the review team for the procurement. And if you try to do anything more than that, then you're going to be in trouble. Procurement's not going to let you. We got them to agree to have 15 subject matter experts from around the agency look at this procurement. And the reason why that was so critical is that this has never been done before, and we needed experts from all over. We needed experts from marketing, we needed experts from operations, we needed experts from disabilities. Every single component had to be involved, and this allowed us to broaden our perspective of people. We also introduced the pre-DA concept. This concept was that instead of just having them come in and say, okay, we're going to provide this service, where do you want it, and then have it put it in there, they came in and said, okay, we went to them and said, show us where this service works. You tell us where this service works, and we'll then put it there if we like your idea. And so it's a two-part procurement where in the first part we go out and say, okay, tell us where this works. They're now in that part where they're doing feasibility studies for where microtransit might work around Los Angeles County. And then we have these 3 feasibility studies that have come back from 3 different companies, and we're going to pick the one or ones that we like best and put the service there. That is a totally different method of procurement that no one has really done before. And we had to fight every step of the way to make it happen, because anytime you're trying to do something new like that, there are all kinds of risks that are posed. Ethics was concerned that this would give an unfair advantage in some way. Procurement was, of course, concerned that this was something they'd never done before. Our legal people told us why we couldn't do it. There were lots of different reasons why we were told, no, you can't do this. But the fact that procurement was on our side in terms of the end game was why we were able to actually make it happen. And something else we did was to test the service. Now, of course, why wouldn't you test the service, right? But no, this is not typically done, because in order to test the service, we had to have the people who had bid on this contract come to LA. We had to get vehicles. We had to put those vehicles on the street. We had to use their software. We had to simulate a microtransit service and see whether it worked. Well, there are so many problems to doing that I can't even begin to tell you. First of all, who's responsible if you're in an accident? Secondly, where are you getting the vehicles from? Third, how do you make sure that no one has an unfair advantage? They have to all have exactly the same type of test. All those types of rules that had to be put in place would normally intimidate people and prevent them from doing that kind of test. But in the end, we tested the service with a number of the folks, not just the 3 that we selected, with a lot of the folks that we had 9 respondents to this RFP. And we tested the service to see whether it would work, and we used that information to help make our selection about the provider. What a concept. These are the types of things that the private sector would do as a matter of course, but that Metro would not typically do. So, next quotation. I did tell you it was on there, so you know that's real. We could have thought of that on our own, and if we improve our services, more people will use them, and we can't afford them. I'm pretty sure you all know that that's all true quotations. Those are all true quotations from Metro. The idea that we could have thought of our own is an interesting one, right? Because there's no real way to prove that you didn't. But I'll tell you the quick story about what that has to do with it. That quote actually came. We got an unsolicited proposal from Goldman Sachs. So you may know the Metro operates express lanes, right? The 110 and the 10 express lanes on hot lanes on those facilities, and we're planning to build out a network of express lanes throughout the county. We're planning to do it over 40 years under Measure M. Goldman Sachs came in and said, "Hey, if you build the ones that produce the most revenue first, you'll have more money to build the next one, and you can build them all within 10 years. I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. Why don't we do that? And we went to our congestion people who run that department and said, why don't we do this? And they said, well, I don't know, we're not so sure. We looked at it, we did more analysis, and eventually we all made the decision, okay, yeah, we should do this. And they said, well, we could have thought of that on our own. You could have, but you didn't. That's the critical thing. Like, you could, probably many of the people in this room could paint a Jackson Pollock, but you didn't do it. He did. And that's the critical component. So that's something that we've seen a lot. And then if we improve our services, more people will use them and can afford that. That's something that I've already talked about with respect to the fact that the public sector faces this challenge all the time, right? Because we want to do things that are better, but every time we make things better, it costs us more money. It is a real thing.
I think that's particularly for services for the elderly.
I was about to say,
huge issue.
this came up in a discussion with Access Services, right? Because we were talking about, well, why do we provide this awful service that's so expensive to the people in the society who most need it, right? It's like the most disabled people. We make them call 48 hours in advance. The service rarely shows up on time.
and it is completely unreliable. And this is the only option that they have. Why do we do this? And they said, well, yeah, if we make it better, then more people will use it. And that's just they're not wrong, right? I mean, they have a budget, and if they blow through that budget and say, well, we made this service much better, no one's rewarding them for that. No one's rewarding them for making their customer experience better. They're only rewarding them for doing what they have with their existing budget the best they can. And that's the inherent challenge that we face in an office of innovation. So just to kind of sum up the lessons learned, and I'll take questions. You want to establish credibility through early wins. I feel like we've been pretty successful with that so far. We've now gotten to the point where people take us more seriously. They still hate us, but at least they take us seriously when we come into a meeting. Used to be we had struggled to get people to come to meetings. Learn to distinguish between PR and reality. I think we've talked about that, particularly with respect to the private sector. There's a lot of false information, a lot of false promises being made right now in technology and transportation. And you have to be able to distinguish. See if you can agree on the goals first. Can't emphasize how important that is. We're still working on that, and hopefully I'll come back to you in 2 years and say, wow, we've really changed this, and all these goals are in place and people agree on them. Resist the urge to demonstrate technology. Don't just go for that shiny new object. The electeds are going to run towards that. Run towards it. You guys probably saw the proposal we got for the aerial tramway recently, which is a really cool idea. We're going to consider it carefully, but you would have thought, based on the media coverage and the mayor's statements, that we'd implemented it already. So you have to be careful with these types of things. And then finally, procurement is your best friend. I did not know before I took this job that my job was about procurement. I once worked with a guy at PB, or Brian mentioned I used to work at PB, whose job was procurement. He was a procurement expert. And he went around the country advising transit agencies on procurement. And I said, that sounds really boring. Why would you do that? What's the point? And he said, well, procurement's important. I never really understood that until I got to this job, where I understand that procurement is everything. Because your ability to make selections about who you're going to use and your ability to do it efficiently will drive your ability to be innovative, to change things, to make a difference at a transit agency. So that's all I got. Thank you very much.
Okay, questions, comments?
Yes.
I have a question about the MicroTransit example. You said that went, like, I can't remember where it was located. It was like the Flex bird thing. And it was like the MicroTransit that went wrong because they like put it in an area.
Talking about Kansas City?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Kansas.
Missouri, but yeah.
Yeah. So that example, that seems really similar to like the MicroTransit that you're going to implement, the new one that you said that you wanted to do it in Station A where there was bus service, but now you're forced to do it in Service B, the station area B.
Yeah.
It seems like exactly similar.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think we are running into that same challenge on the Mobility on Demand project. We've avoided it on the MicroTransit project because we went through this long and really thoughtful procurement process to get that done. Mobility on Demand, we had the advantage of not having to go through a procurement process, which is wonderful. We were just able to select people quickly. But the downside was that we don't have the same agreement across the agency. It's interesting. And Marla, you can talk to Marla about it afterwards, and she runs that project. That project gets very little attention compared to MicroTransit, which our CEO talks about nonstop. They're very similar projects. But because that project gets less attention and isn't spoken about as much, I think that let operations make the decision that they made on that choice. Now, I don't think that means the project is doomed to failure. There are 3 stations, and I think that we will succeed in what we're trying to accomplish, but it's just not going to be as good as we'd hoped. Yeah.
I've got a couple questions. Sorry, this is my capstone project topic. So, first question: what are you guys thinking about for fares? Is it like a flat fare like Metrobus, or is it gonna sort of?
Which project?
Sorry, yours. Do you have the 3 stations?
That's Mobility on Demand, which is different than MicroTransit. Yeah.
Either. Is it sort of a flat fare or accruing based on time and distance like the TNCs tend to do? Do you have?
We're thinking about a flat fare. Yeah.
Okay. And then my other question, so for the stations, sounds similar to like what AC Flex is doing up in
AC Transit, yeah.
AC Transit, where there's sort of it's a flexible on-demand service in and out of BART stations, but because they try to serve the station every 30 minutes, they limit the number of people who can ride it and the number of pickups they can make.
Right.
So do you have sort of a balance between how many people you can pick up and then making sure you're serving the train stations frequently enough?
Right. Well, I mean, I don't know that much about that project. It wasn't our paper. My understanding is that's the most successful demonstration of microtransit service that we've had so far in this country, and that there have been some benefits to the way that they've done that. We don't know yet how our microtransit is going to operate, but it is not currently our plan to operate a mobility on demand service that way. Currently, we have this provider. It's called VIA. They're going to provide the service to and from these stations. You'll get something of a discount if you're using Metro services, so you're transferring to Metro services. But otherwise, it's really just about opening up that service, which they already have. They provide in other cities, opening up that service to people who can't use it currently. Yes.
I have two questions about performance measures. So the first one, we talked about how Metro staff are very just focused on ridership, and Brian and everyone did a report about ridership falling, and you're saying that's not really inherently a problem as long as people are finding mobility through other means. And so, how would you kind of measure whether people, how do you measure mobility?
Yeah.
I think it says transit ridership is a very easy thing to measure.
Right. Yeah.
That's my first question. My second question is, you're trying to convince people that OEI is great within Metro, and how do you have a way?
Yeah, don't make too many assumptions.
This much money, we're great. And everyone's like, oh, I'm convinced. Or do you see how you will convince Metro's staff with some number?
Right. Okay. So the first question, I don't think that we can say, well, ridership is falling and that's okay. The reason I think we can't say that is that we have a major mobility problem in Los Angeles, right? And I think it's obvious without any kind of performance measures that that's the case. We've got tremendous congestion problems. We've got a public transit system that is wholly inadequate, as evidenced by the fact that the only people who use it are those who can't afford a car. Those things are problems, right? We're not achieving the public policy objective of making sure that people who are most disadvantaged in society have access to opportunity. And we're not meeting the public policy objective of ensuring that people who do have the means can get where they want to go efficiently. So those things are not being met. The fact that ridership is falling is related to those. It's just that we shouldn't be only focusing on ridership as the way to improve that. And I'll tell you the performance measures we have in our plan, which you should definitely read, which say that everyone's got to be within 10 minutes walk of transit service that comes at least every 15 minutes. So that everyone in LA County is going to be able to walk to an effective transit service within 15 minutes. That's a first a performance measure that's important. We're also going to focus on improving bus speeds. Bus speeds we're calling for a 30% increase in bus speed. Because when you improve bus speeds, you are improving mobility. You're getting people where they want to go faster. It's getting directly to the heart of what mobility is. And when you're improving bus speeds, that probably means that you're able to provide some kind of better service for other vehicles as well, as evidenced by our Silver Line, for example, where you have higher bus speeds because you have an exclusive lane for buses that people can pay to use. So there are lots of ways to improve mobility based on those performance measures. We're still working on drilling those down more, but that's where we're starting from. And then with their second question, my goal is not for everyone to like OEI. I don't think that that's a realistic goal. My goal is for people to have no choice but to respect the results that we've accomplished. And I'll give you an example of that, which goes back to the hot lane example. The person who is now the deputy CEO of Metro was the woman who was placed in charge of the hot lanes project. You guys may not know this, but New York City tried to pass congestion pricing. They failed. LA got the money. LA got the money to implement congestion pricing on two freeways, 10 and the 110. Metro, as an agency, when this woman, Stephanie Wiggins, came in, said many of the same things that they said to me. Why are you here? Why are we doing this? What is the point of this project? We're a transit agency. Why are we operating express lanes? What are you trying to do? And she had to operate against that same wave of people just not wanting to talk to her, not wanting to deal with her. But what she told me is, once those lanes opened, and everyone liked them, and everyone wanted to be her friend. And now she's the deputy CEO. So I think you don't succeed by getting people to like you. You succeed by demonstrating success. and then people will change their tune. Yeah.
You mentioned that that Sound Transit is a partner on Mobility OnDemand. Is that Seattle's transportation agency?
Yes.
What are they doing in LA?
Oh, so it's a partnership. They're doing it in Seattle.
They're
So they're doing a
similar.
similar project in Seattle, and UCLA and University of Washington and Eno are all going to study the results of the projects.
Okay.
Yes.
3 questions. 2 big ones and 1 more podcast.
Be concise.
First, how do we change the culture in public sector agencies from one that's risk averse and focused on performing and maintaining your job to one in which you're focused on actually delivering results? And bundling another question to that, do you think that this the risk averse culture in public sector agencies derives from the public's leeriness in the U.S., particularly compared to other developed countries, of public sector spending, and sort of that being a constraint on public sector's ability to develop new ideas and thus deliver results? And then the second, more sort of fine-tuned question is, it seems to me that these pilot first mile, last mile connections projects, the others, the ones in like Kansas City were more sort of MicroTransit, but even sort of with TNCs, are bound to fail if they are carried out in geographically constrained station areas, given that TNCs rely on economies of scale, sort of large combinations of riders and drivers. And so I'm wondering if you agree with that, or have evidence to counter that, and if there are ways that we can get beyond what I like to think of as a pilot syndrome of just implementing stuff on a small scale
Right.
and then it failing when it could have been much more successful when implemented on a large scale in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think your last question is related to the others, right? I mean, you can't implement it on a large scale. You have to do a pilot. Yeah, I just don't. I mean, we are not a company that has endless coffers that can just go out and say, we're going to do this enormous thing and take an enormous risk the way that the Boring Company is doing right now, for example. We can't do that, and we shouldn't be able to do that. We have to be somewhat cautious because we're using public funds, absolutely. However, I don't think that's the reason that we're risk averse. I don't think it's because we are afraid to do big things and because of public money. I think, or because we don't have enough money. I think it's because when you're using public money, the amount of scrutiny on what you're doing is greatly heightened. And we have spent an inordinate amount of time in senior leadership meetings talking about how to avoid being in the press for something negative that someone tries to dig up on us. Not because we're sitting there saying, oh my God, we did all these horrible things, how do we cover them up? But because people are looking to find something that you did. They're looking to embarrass you. There was a story that came out maybe a year ago about the public health agency here in LA County about misuse of funds, where it was kind of seemed like they were using funds inappropriately, but it also could have been just, they were trying to do the best job they could with the money they had. Those things, that's a fine line that isn't always so easy to distinguish. So the reason that we're more risk averse in the public sector has a lot to do with the amount of scrutiny that's on you because you're using public money, not necessarily because you don't have enough public money. And to kind of get to the second or the third question again, I think that we will succeed when it comes to our mobility on demand and microtransit projects because you don't have to have a huge network to accomplish the goals that we're talking about. What we're talking about is creating a TNC that's accessible to everybody when current TNCs are not. And if the outcome of that project is just that the existing TNCs start becoming accessible to everybody, that's a win. It doesn't have to be that the outcome is we now partner with TNCs all over the place. We want to try to get those public policy goals accomplished. And same with microtransit. Like on microtransit, if we're able to demonstrate that there's a market for public sector driven microtransit vehicles because they're accessible to everyone because they serve a need that is unmet, and then someone else wants to come in and provide that for a profit, go ahead. That's not, our goal is not to dominate the mobility space. Our goal is to accomplish the public policy objectives and to let others come in and help us accomplish those with us. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so 2 questions. So first of all, you mentioned if TNCs could be accessible to everyone, great. Is there any concern that, we know the TNCs are losing money and they're using a lot of VC money to subsidize their rides, that if essentially their ridership expands at the expense of maybe bus ridership, and then they run out of that money, or they see a position where they have enough of a market share to jack up the prices a lot, is there concern about that, and then having basically a service that is completely out of the price range for people, but they're nonetheless dependent on?
Yeah, there's a lot of concern about that. I mean, I think that's a big issue that we're thinking about. And if you look at our strategic plan, one of the things in there is that we need to look at how to regulate TNCs. Right now, TNCs are being more or less unregulated by the CPUC, and it doesn't make much sense for the state to regulate TNCs. It does make sense for localities of some kind to regulate them, and then have the regulation be on a level playing field. And right now, we're not legally authorized to do that. But we do think that it's something we need to look at, and we need to figure out how to get the authority to do it. And we're going to be fought pretty heavily by some very powerful people in our attempt to do that. But yeah, I absolutely think it's a huge problem. TNCs are coming in, and I know that Brian's research and others have demonstrated they're not really taking transit passengers, but what they're doing that might be even worse is adding it to congestion, while also adding to emissions, and while putting a lot of other people out of business who have reasonable jobs. They're doing a lot of things that are negative externalities. They also create positive things. The job of public policy regulation is to try to keep the positive and mitigate the negative. That's what regulation is about. And it has to be done for TNCs, or else we're going to fall into that exact problem. I saw it there and then here. Yeah.
One question.
It has 4 parts.
So, I'm curious, what was that initial first project you worked on to get that win?
Yeah, it was Uber Expo. Yeah, Uber Expo was our first win that we felt established us as a force within Metro, because there were so many people pushing against us. It was so hard to get it done. It was a little tiny thing, but once we got it done, people realized we weren't messing around. Yeah.
So you mentioned dedicated bus lanes being part of the new strategic plan, which I look forward to reading. Can you speak to a little about Metro's thinking? Just elaborate that a bit. Are you talking about like bus corridors in dense areas, like the 3rd Street corridor in Seattle, or like the kind of long-haul dedicated bus lanes in Vermont, or more freeway-based lanes like the Silver Line, or a mix of all those?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, remember that our metric is we want to increase bus speeds by 30%. So we got to do that somehow, and this is a critical component of that. We also say in the plan that we're going to take all existing rapid lines and upgrade them to BRT within the next 10 years. So that's a very specific thing that we're going to do. We also have several BRT projects that are already on the books, right? So we've got the Vermont BRT project, which is already in planning stages, for advanced planning stages. We've got the North Hollywood Pasadena BRT project, which the board is talking about this month. We got the North San Fernando Valley BRT project. And then we've got all of the BRTs that I would imagine will be on express lanes once those express lanes open. So we have the 605, we're going to have the 405, we're going to have the 105. So there are lots. This is a combination of all 3 of those that you're going to see, if all goes well, a tremendous increase in the amount of BRT in this county in the next 10 years. Yes?
I'm sorry if I didn't catch this. Did you say in the strategic plan the goal was to get everybody in the county access to a bus that runs every 15 minutes?
A transit vehicle within 10-minute walking distance that comes at least once every 15 minutes.
Right. LA County's a very big place.
I didn't say it was going to be easy.
I feel like with limited resources, would it not make more sense to focus more on priority high-use corridors than on literally all of the county?
Well, it might make sense to focus on priority high-use corridors if your goal is to provide the most mobility for the most people. Yes. But actually, our goal is not just the most mobility for the most people. We have a specific goal that is the most disadvantaged members of society need to have access to more opportunities compared to everyone else. Because right now they don't. Right now, if you're dependent on transit, you don't have access to nearly as much opportunity in the world in LA County as people who have a vehicle. And so in order to change that, it can't just be that we're focusing on high corridors. Also, when you think of what does it mean to have a 10-minute walk to to something that comes at least once every 15 minutes, don't think about that as a bus. Don't even think about that as a train, because we're talking about microtransit and mobility on demand for a reason. Those might prove to be more efficient ways to serve certain components of LA County. That is the reason we're testing them in the first place, is that if they prove to be more efficient, let's say that there are places right now that we're serving with a bus that runs once every 30 minutes for the most transit-dependent populations. That happens a lot in LA County. Now we're able to replace that with a microtransit service, still serving the same amount of people, giving them service that comes much more frequently, takes them more directly to their destination, and costs us the same. Wouldn't we do that? So that's why these tests are so critical, is to figure out whether we can do that. Yes?
What's like a typical work day for you in terms of tasks that you're actually carrying out?
Yeah, in terms of what
tasks, just things that you're doing. Are you reading through proposals? Are you meeting with agencies? What do you, I guess, throughout your day?
Well, there's a very big difference between my day and the day of my staff. So you should talk to Marla about her day. And so a lot of my day is going to meetings and showing up. And I didn't realize that was going to be the case, but it is the case. A lot of times there's an intractable problem where my staff is trying to deal with some issue that someone else in Metro is saying no to, and I have to be at that meeting. I don't necessarily have to say anything. Sometimes I will. But if I'm at that meeting, they're not going to say no to my people as easily as they would otherwise. So a lot of my day is going to meetings like that. A lot of my day is what is going to places and smoothing over problems that we've already created, or starting new ones, right? So a lot of times I have meetings with top leadership where I'm like, we're about to do this thing that's going to be really difficult and annoying for you. So how do we make it less so? Or I go to people and I'm saying, I'm really sorry that we did this thing that really made your life difficult. So it's a lot. When you're a chief executive, it's a very different job. A lot of my day is spent with staff coming in and saying, you want to do this, or you want to do this, and me making a decision based on the data that I have before me. That's very different than you should talk to Marla about what her day-to-day life is like, which I think is a very different set of challenges. Yeah. Madeline.
I really like the slide we kind of outlined the private sector versus public sector. One thing that the private sector does much better is know who their customers are. So I'm wondering, in this grand scheme of trying to serve everyone, or you can either take either microtransit or mobility on demand, how is your office thinking about who the customers are, and how is that kind of inserting into kind of your planning and deployment decisions?
Well, there's who their customers are, and then there's what they want. I mean, both of those are important. The way that we approached it in the strategic plan is that we did a comprehensive survey for LA County, and we did not survey people who ride transit in LA County. We surveyed all of LA County, with the idea being that all people in LA County are our customers because they are paying taxes to us and expect something in return for that. That perspective in itself was an unusual and new perspective to take. The results of that survey were not all that surprising, and they're reflected in what we're trying to do in the strategic plan. The results of that survey were people feel that they cannot use transit as not a viable option, in large part because it's too slow and doesn't go where they want to go. Okay. You probably could have predicted that, but actually we've had previous surveys where people have come back and said, oh, well, the data shows that the main reason people aren't riding our system anymore is that they're concerned about security. And therefore we need to beef up our security, and then we'll get those riders back. And that doesn't actually happen to be true. The main reason people aren't riding your system who are former riders might be security, but the main reason people aren't riding your system who are not riders is because it doesn't go where they want to go fast enough, and they have a better option. And so that's why our plan reflects trying to get at those very people. But I think your larger issue goes to the heart of a problem that we haven't figured out how to solve yet, which is that we don't have great data on what our customers are doing and where they're trying to go to and from yet. And that's another initiative in the strategic plan, is to try to deal with that and try to figure it out. But the data sets that we're dealing with are awful. So I mean, you guys probably have to deal with them a lot more than I do. But the TAP data is not accurate. And every time a reporter calls, we have to explain to them why we don't want to give them TAP data, and they have to go through the public records process, because otherwise if we give them the TAP data, we're giving them unreliable data. And that seems like a really terrible answer. We should know where our customers are and what they're doing, and it's kind of a priority, right? So, Brian?
So I have a two-part question. One is that I think that you did a great job of sort of describing the dilemma or all of the things that mitigate against being innovative in other realms of the agency. And indeed, there's a lot of price to be paid for trying something new and having it not work. So one question is, if you can convince people to go along with something new and in a sense recognize that they're entailing risk in a department or division they may not appreciate sort of the potential payoffs as much as your office does. Have you ever been in a situation where you try to have those people's back? That if things don't pan out so well, you're willing to take some of the heat? Because it seems to me that if somebody takes a risk, it doesn't go out well, and they pay a price for it, then that sends a signal elsewhere in the agency to hunker down and not take those risks. And I just wonder about how you talked about risk of the private sector, how you handle the distribution of risk within the agency.
Yeah.
And then the second question is this idea of mobility management. We've had readings in here in the class that many of these people are in a class. The people who have an option to travel by other means, typically in a motor vehicle, but a reasonable option to travel by other means, when they use public transit, tend to be much more satisfied with the experience than those who don't have an option.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you've talked about is various innovations that could conceivably take customers away from a bus line, for example. But if you were to find that those customers, on average, were much happier with their experience, they were much more satisfied with their mobility experience, even if there was no change in ridership overall, that could be considered a win if that was part of a metric. You see what I mean in
Right.
terms of satisfaction. And I wondered how you're trying to incorporate those kinds of things into the way you evaluate what you do.
Well, on the first question, I think that's one of the lessons we learned early on was that we need to offer to take responsibility if things go awry. We need to own those failures. And that's why the two projects we talked about, Mobility on Demand and MicroTransit, those really are our projects because no one else wanted to take that risk. And so we had to take those risks, and we had the ability to take those risks because that's what we were set up to do. But I think that the example that I used earlier with respect to county council with our lawyers is apt as well, because the risk is usually identified by council and by procurement. That's their job, is to identify risk. We also have a risk office, which will gladly identify risks, and they often do. And then we have a risk management office. But all three of those departments are there to say what their opinion is, and they don't actually have to own the project. It's the other departments that are not the risk departments that have to own the project. And the way we've adjusted is that we either take the project ourselves, as we've done in this case, or we give it to folks who are willing to experiment and who are willing to take that risk. And when we say to them, this is your project now, because we have 109 unsolicited proposals, so we can't do them all. And we do say to them, this is your project now, they have to be a willing partner. So we've gotten around it by either taking the risk ourselves or finding people within the agency who are willing to do it. And then, as far as your second question, yeah, we don't have a metric to evaluate whether people are happier. That gets to the root of the issue at MicroTransit and Mod, right? Which is, if we've got somebody who's currently a Metro customer, who now has an hour and a half commute, and now we're going to make their commute into 30 minutes, that's a huge win, right? But no one's given us credit for that. We have no way of necessarily measuring that. We have no idea if that's even happened. MicroTransit's going to have those metrics to figure that out. But in general, we don't have those metrics across the agency. And so what we're hoping to do is, at a minimum, is we're going to keep doing the customer survey every 2 years to find out whether we're meeting some of those metrics in terms of customer satisfaction, and try to use that as a baseline metric for the agency. So, back here and then here. Yeah.
I'm wondering how often you get to solicit proposals from outside the U.S. I was in Japan with a couple of these guys up here in March. They work on transportation, so yeah, I'm wondering how often that happens to a specific office just for like international exchange.
I can't think of one. We held an industry forum to kick off the unsolicited proposal process, where we invited what my boss called the usual and unusual suspects. So We tried to include an international audience. We have had a lot of interest from international firms. And in fact, I guess it depends on what you mean by international. We've had Spanish firms submit unsolicited proposals for public-private partnerships, for example. And I know that there are a lot of Chinese firms that are interested in those as well on the major capital side. Not so much on the rest of it. But when it comes to multi-billion-dollar projects, we're not getting those done without international interest because there's not enough capacity to do those here. So we're going to have a lot more interest on those. Yeah.
So I think, we're all in grad school now. We're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. We go to an agency, and if we don't work for something like OEI, we go into planning, we go into ops. We're entry level. We are answering to bosses who are part of this risk-averse network. Eventually, we might get to the point where we get to break things, but by that point, people are just kind of broken by the system and don't. And
graduate school study planning,
right? That's great. But so, do you have advice on how someone can go in at an entry level and sort of keep in mind some of these ideas about changing the system and doing things better and not just getting sucked into the sort of institutional culture that is very stoic and stodgy?
I mean, my solution was not to go in entry level.
Right. I think everyone I know in Metro who looks like you also didn't go in entry level, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was, when I was coming out of grad school, my number one goal was, how can I find a job that allows me to not start entry level, not work my way up through a bureaucracy, and all those things. And that's partly why I went to get a PhD, because I couldn't find one when I came out of a master's. I'm like, maybe I'll just go study this more because this is fun. But I think that one of the things that we do, and again, this doesn't answer your question really, but it does kind of get to the issue, which is that we have this fellowship program within the agency. So people from other departments can come to our department and work for a year. They apply to be fellows in our department. So far, no one wants to go back, right? Because they get to work on this big, cool stuff and break things, like you said, and then they got to go back to ops, and it's a challenge. And so they haven't really wanted to go back. This year we might get one back. We'll see. But I think that the larger issue that you're getting at also is that within a public agency, you have to put in a tremendous amount of time before you get to a point where you're making those real decisions. And we've been dealing with this as an agency more generally, that while for people coming from outside the agency, you can get into a great position. People within the agency, it's very difficult to get promoted to that great position, and that makes us a less appealing place to go and build a career. So I don't have an answer for you other than I would avoid taking an entry level position at a transit agency unless it's with my office. Yeah. All right. Anything else? We're good? Oh, one more.
Okay, last question.
Okay. Well, something Brian has talked about, maybe not in this class, but in other classes, that one of the reasons Uber and Lyft were able to, push their product to scale so quickly is because they didn't own any of their vehicles, and they were using existing vehicles owned by the driver. And I know there's these services like Get Around where you can share your car. I would love to just slap a Metro sticker on my car, and then when it's not being used, they have someone drive it around. Is that something that you've looked into at all, or?
We have not looked into that. I would be certainly interested in learning more about how that might work. I'm imagining all the different things people will be yelling at me for why it wouldn't work. And maybe I'll just kind of close with this anecdote about how ideas like that come in and how to deal with them. Because we get ideas like that all the time, right? That are really good ideas for things that Metro has never even conceived of doing. And when you bring those ideas to somebody in Metro or to a bunch of departments in Metro, the first reaction is to tell you, here are all the reasons why that won't work. And I could do that with what you just said, by the way. I could tell you all the reasons why it won't work. But our job at OEI is to shift the conversation from, here's all the reasons why it won't work, towards what would it take to make this work? What would it cost? Not just in terms of money, but in terms of resources, in terms of effort, in terms of all the things we have to do. What would it take? And then decide if it's worth it. That's the conversation you need to have. And I hope that Brian is doing a good job of teaching you guys how to do that here, because I know when I was in grad school at MIT, a lesser institution, they taught us how to look at any given idea and say what's wrong with it. They would often do that. They say, here's a case study. Tell us why this won't work. I learned how to do that really well. But that's not actually what you should be doing in the public agency when you're trying to do new stuff. You should be thinking about the costs and benefits and whether it's worth that cost. So hopefully Brian will teach you how to do that here.
And the next talk in this series, for those of you who are visiting, is on Thursday. We're going to hear about bike and scooter sharing.
Awesome.